Good morning, distinguished colleagues, conservation professionals, researchers, and friends. Today, as we celebrate Global Tiger Day,
Nepal's extraordinary achievement in tiger conservation has become an international success story.
Called in Arctic. Every conservation success also brings new responsibilities.
during the past 15 years, I have worked closely with indigenous communities.
Human-tiger conflict is much more than an ecological issue.
Together, we can create more inclusive and responsive conservation, sustaining human-tiger coexistence for future generations. The following presentation shares Nepal's journey, the emerging challenges of human-tiger conflict, and a research vision for building peaceful coexistence through ethnographic understanding and community knowledge. Presentation prepared using the author's original field experience, photographs, analysis, and presentation materials. AI-assisted tools were used solely to enhance narration and visual presentation. Thank you for joining me on this Global Tiger Day. We are here to share lessons learned from our recent programs. Together, we can transform knowledge into practical solutions.
In the dense, tall grasses of Nepal's Terai Arc landscape, an apex predator has finally returned in force. In 2010, the global conservation community made a pledge known as TX2, an ambitious target to double the world's wild tiger populations. This chart tracks Nepal's progress. Through strict habitat management, the population sat at 121 tigers in 2009. Over the next 13 years, that number surges to 355, crossing the dotted global target line. By ecological metrics, this is a massive victory. But this macro-level triumph has manufactured a severe, highly localized crisis. Hitting a biodiversity target on paper does not guarantee coexistence on the ground. The success of tiger restoration has actively generated an acute threat for the humans living nearby. Look at this map of Nepal's Terai Arc landscape. The dark green areas represent protected national parks, bordered tightly by human settlements. Notice where the orange conflict hotspots are located. They aren't deep inside the core protected zones. They emerge exclusively along the fringes. These designated buffer zones are now reporting a substantially higher frequency of fatal encounters than the core park areas themselves. The core parks have reached their ecological carrying capacity. The designated reserves simply cannot contain the volume of new tigers produced by the TX2 initiative. This map highlights biological corridors, narrow strips connecting larger reserves. Tigers are pushed outward into these migration routes, already populated by humans. We call this the squeeze. Expanding agricultural borders and expanding tiger territories are compressing into the exact same geography. A geographic designation originally intended to shield human populations has, ironically, become the primary arena for interspecies violence. To understand who is actually paying the cost of this conservation success, we have to look closely at the specific demographics inside this squeeze. The territories overlapping with these new dispersal corridors are primarily inhabited by indigenous Tharu, Chepang, and Bote communities. Here, risk exposure is dictated entirely by the daily physical requirements of rural subsistence labor. This creates a highly gendered reality. Women face a vastly disproportionate level of risk compared to men. Daily economic duties, like collecting fodder for livestock, grazing animals, and harvesting fuel wood, force women deep into the dense fringe forests where tigers now hunt. Human-tiger conflict is not an equal opportunity threat. It exploits existing rural poverty and rigid gender roles. In response to rising casualties, major NGOs and governments deploy heavily funded mitigation policies. These often look like physical hardware, installing solar electric fencing along forest borders, and building predator-proof corrals for livestock. These are technocratic interventions. They attempt to solve the conflict purely as a geographic boundary issue, assuming a physical barrier will keep the species apart. This iceberg diagram illustrates why these technical fixes consistently fail on the ground. The visible tip represents the current policy approach: physical fences and financial compensation handed out after an attack. But this narrow focus completely ignores the massive submerged social drivers, gendered risk, rigid social hierarchies, and economic dependence that dictate how people actually live and move. A metal fence won't stop a woman from entering the forest if her family's economic survival relies on gathering firewood on the other side. Engineering solutions cannot resolve a crisis built on sociological inequality. To achieve functional coexistence, conservation policy must pivot away from hardware-only models towards preventative, socially inclusive frameworks. True mitigation requires integrating raw social science variables directly into biological management plans. This framework rests on 3 pillars. First, political ecology maps local power and governance. Second, sustainable livelihoods ensures economic resilience without relying on forest resources. Third, gender and social inclusion analysis accounts for women's unique risk exposure. Viable policy exists only at their central intersection. Sustainable conservation must be architected from these sociological realities, rather than relying exclusively on zoological headcounts. When applied in the field, this for national conservation finance to local equity metrics. The massive revenues generated by tiger tourism must directly offset the physical risk burden carried by the buffer zone residents. Once tested, this ethnographic policy model can serve as a scalable blueprint for conservation landscapes across South Asia. At the edge of the Terai Arc, the boundary between human and animal habitat is shrinking by the day. The TX2 initiative successfully brought a species back from the brink, but that biological milestone is an incomplete metric of success. We cannot claim a global conservation victory if ecological restoration is permanently subsidized by the systemic vulnerability of marginalized human populations.